Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 11th of September 2024. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key on the screen at the moment. Pause the video. Now, this is a 2-day update, so I didn't do an update yesterday. That's all I have time for at the moment, is one every 2 days. But yeah, we're going to look primarily, as you can see, all the activity appears to be up in Kursk and down on the eastern front line from Kursk further to the south to Vuhledar. We are going to look at Kursk first. Google Maps is being a bit funky there. Google Earth even. Right, okay, you can see that there are an awful lot of red and pink pins on the map, which means that the Russians are making gains, and they are making some serious gains in the Kursk area. Lots of confusion about the preciseness of what's going on here, but certainly the Russians have finally mounted their big counterattacks, and they seem pretty impressive. As in, they have certainly mounted a lot of forces and are pushing the Ukrainians back in a number of places, but it's unclear as to quite how successful they've been. There's some claims hanging around of Ukrainian moves in certain places. Here we have Osint Yuri saying Russian sources report that their forces have begun a large-scale counteroffensive in the Kursk region. So there seems to be two prongs to this, if you like, or two areas where they are attacking, and that is sort of up here and down on the lower western side as well. Claims that, they could have been pushing down to encircle, although we got some blue pins here. I think that's probably just a bit of reassessing exactly what is controlled around Makivka. But as you can see around here, a large amount of land. Both mappers have fairly similar appraisals of what's going on here. In fact, Andrew Perpetua has pushed the Russians further forward to the eastern direction there, and yeah, a really big area of land. Snagost is this town where there was evidence of a mechanized assault towards there. South of Koronovo, they are pushing the Ukrainians back, and that is trying to push them back as well from their position of attacking towards the west. That's the Ukrainians, and under the same river that comes along here through Glushkovo, Zvernoye and Karij, and then skirting down by Tetkino over here. So this was the area that the Ukrainians were looking like they were going to make a move on. They were taking out the bridges, permanent and pontoon bridges across this river, and it was looking like they could attack from the east, attack from the south, and even attack from the west as well, potentially. And it looks like the Russians are wanting to put a stop to that, so they're attacking all along this western front. So that's more of a worry to them than anywhere towards Sujia and over here on the east. And then sort of coming in from the north, this sort of long salient up here. As you can see, Andrew Perpetua has that taken back now under Russian control, and a large area of land up here back under Russian control. Surat Maps didn't have as much control for the Russians up there, but has taken, for the Ukrainians up there, but has taken the Ukrainian front line further to the south here by Durovka, just a small amount there. Andrew Perpetua had another area up here as well. So yeah, it's looking like the Russians might have had some fairly successful counterattacks all around this kind of general area. As this source says, from Koronovo south towards Snagost, we were talking about, and from Trotskoye eastward towards Gordivka in this area. And Gordivka, just at the bottom there, appears to be now under Russian control again, if I am correct in saying. Oops, I'm a bit too far to the south, I think. Where's Gordivka gone? Anyway, in this general area, yeah. So I think it's just there. Gordivka under Russian control, as according to Surat Mats, but probably grey zone according to Andrew Perpetua there. So those are your two areas. two of the main pushes. Russian channels say that the Russian forces launched a counteroffensive, says Status 6, on the Ukrainian left flank of the Kursk Oblast of Russia. The advance is reportedly spearheaded by elements of the 155th Separate Guards Naval Infantry Brigade, so they were one of the crack units from down in Vuhledar earlier on in the war, have been reconstituted a number of times. They've taken a hell of a beating, but they seem to be being used here, as well as the 106th VDV, so there's an airborne Guards Airborne Division, so Marines and Airborne, so trying to use their crack troops. The Russians claim that their forces recaptured a number of settlements, including Gordivka, as mentioned, although this cannot be verified at the moment. And there you go. There's one of the maps sort of looking at what they are trying to achieve. A video of an armoured column with at least 8 tanks and armoured vehicles from the Russian VDV's 51st Airborne Regiment assaulting Snagost in Kursk Oblast. It appears the Russians were able to get the armoured force across the same river despite Ukrainian attack strikes on the bridges. So those pontoon bridges apparently were good enough to, or they were operational enough, or they built some more in order to get equipment across the same river. Deep State Ukraine, so the Deep State mapping says the situation has worsened on Ukraine's left flank in Kursk Oblast. So that is a video there showing a mechanized assault by the Russians in the Kursk, that western part of the Kursk Oblast towards Snagost. So there's a number of vehicles just driving along the road, nothing too much to report there, but part of the attacks in the area. Okay, moving on. What else? So Tendar says Russians are pushing south from Koronovo. So this is here, looking to, as they were, break off a chunk of the Ukrainians there. I presume Ukrainians were able to get out. Snagost is now under Russian control, and they've kind of cut all this whole area off. Ongoing fights in and near the village of Snagost is claimed here, possibly even Obukovka. I believe that they are trying to break the semi-cauldron of Glushkovko. There we have it in slightly larger magnification. Snagost there. And indeed, that seems, so there was all this area previously both mappers had. So we go back to Tendar here. This area here is no longer, at least according to my two mappers there, no longer under Russian control, and they've been pushed right back towards right back along here, really, towards the east. Okay, so that's Tendar. What else? Moving on, Null Reports. So Null Reports has mapping of today's activities and other claims. We'll look at some of the mappers first. So villages highlighted in red would have allegedly been recaptured by the Russians. So that's Snagost, and that he says that here they were still under. They were still contested, but that could be some time ago. I mean, that was this morning, but that might have changed since then. Several Russian sources confirm ongoing. Actually, we come to that a little bit later. That's interesting. We'll look at that in a second. What else? Russian forces have liberated around 10 settlements in the Kursk region, according to Chechen Akhmat commander Aptia Laudanov. Footage from the Russian side shows Ukrainian activity on the Ukrainian side of Nekotivka checkpoint on the Belgorod border, and that's what we're going to come to later. The Ukrainians could be trying some things elsewhere. According to Russian sources, Ukrainian units are moving in the direction of Medvezhye in the Kursk region. Again, that's outside of where we're talking about at the moment, and I want to leave that for a second. But most of these tweets are talking about that. On the Kursk front, small Russian groups are conducting assaults. As of now, they have lost a company, 3 BMPs, 1 tank and 1 APC. Their advance has been partially halted, said a Ukrainian military source about the situation in Kursk, but don't know exactly where. More Russian sources now report or confirm that Ukrainian forces are trying to break into the Glushkovky district in the Kursk region. Quote, right now our troops are repelling the onslaught of Ukrainian troops. Under the cover of 2 tanks, the AFU rolled up a trawl and are trying to carry out demining activities. One of the Ukrainian tanks has already been hit by a kamikaze drone. Also, the field reports about the destruction of 2 of the 5 enemy armoured vehicles that were trying to deliver Ukrainian paratroopers. Now, this could be further along here into the south, along this area. I'm not 100% sure. There's Medvezhye, actually, so that's where we're talking about. So one of the claims that we have seen, there was another map somewhere. one of the claims is that the Ukrainians are pushing back and sort of flanking them from the side as the Russians are pushing along here. And that could be fairly clever. I don't know how successful they've been. The claims were, as you saw a little bit there, they were demining and getting engineering vehicles and trying to clear out these areas of both mines and Dragon's Teeth. And so that would indicate that the Ukrainians were looking to attack there. Larger Russian channels are now picking up and confirming the information regarding the Ukrainian attack towards Medvezhye. According to the latest information, Ukrainian units managed to grab a foothold already. Quote, the enemy is supported by artillery very actively. At present, the onslaught is continuing. So that's interesting. That could be a counter attack, a bit of a game of chess maybe around here. As each side tries to achieve their objectives. The Ukrainians could be trying to capture some of the Russians off guard and flank them and cut them off, but I don't know how many forces the Ukrainians would have to commit to such a move there. Right, we're going to go back earlier in this thread, and yes, let's have a look at this as well. So in Belgorod region, a locomotive and about 11 empty freight train cars were derailed. I'm going to show you some of that tomorrow, but there are also some claims, and I think I have that over where do we have it? No, there's a claim from Tim White this morning that the Russians are also possibly being attacked somewhere in the Belgorod region, that the Ukrainians might be trying to move in somewhere between the Kursk incursion or invasion and where the Russians have attacked down into Kharkiv here. So somewhere around here, maybe the Ukrainians are pushing, and then the claims are they're also pushing here. And then some further claims, interestingly, that the Ukrainians are pushing and fighting up here at Kumatovka and Kalinovka there. So interesting. There could be Ukrainians pushing there, which means that the Russians, I said earlier, I think in my video this morning, that the Ukrainians could be playing a game of whack-a-mole to keep the Russians on their feet, keep attacking in certain places to divert some of the attention the Russians are putting here, and so that their own troops can dig in better in Kursk. But I don't know whether that's definitely the case. But here's one of the claims here. So this is, like I mentioned, this is Kumatovka and Kalinovka there. There's a border crossing back here. So Russian sources report that, quote, troubling reports from the Kursk region near the villages of Kumatovka and Kalinovka. They are 15 kilometers east of the border crossing with Ukraine and 60 kilometers north of current hostilities in the Kursk region. So it does need verification, but it could be that place there, that the Ukrainians have attacked across the border in that region and are fighting there, as mentioned as well down here. So if we go on to this other one, where are you? This one. And then several Russian sources confirm ongoing clashes at Novi Put in Kursk region bordering Ukraine. This is roughly 25 kilometers west of the current front line in the Kursk region. So this is below the same river, it appears, as it comes east to west. And we'll have a look for that. So that's Novi Put. It's going to be somewhere down here, one would think. We've got Medvezhye as well, and Novi Put is over here. Whether that is part of that same activity or whether it is two separate attacks, I don't know, but that's another place being mentioned. So interesting times in Kursk. The Russians are definitely pushing back big time. Are the Ukrainians going to heavily defend these areas from what could be some overwhelming forces there, or will they defend by distracting? And I guess we'll have to wait and find out. So Governor of Gladkov in Belgorod region has reported ongoing battles at the border, but denied claims that Ukrainian forces had captured Zhuralyovka. He acknowledged the difficult situation, but emphasized that Zhuralyovka remains under Russian control and no enemy forces are present there. Familiar phrasing is mentioned there. So that could be, or again, of interest. That might be the place between that Tim White was mentioning this morning, somewhere between the Kursk salient and these Kharkiv salient. So I'm just going to try and find that place. Yeah, it's actually very close to the existing salient that the Russians have taken into Kharkiv to the north by Lyubimki. So it's this settlement quite close to a border area that was previously attacked Nekotivka, and it's that one, Zhirilovka. So the Ukrainians could be pushing into there, might be part of this larger operation in the Kharkiv Oblast, or it could be connected to what's going on in Kursk. Anyway, that's that. So there's an area that we need to keep very close eye on to see whether the Russians do make significant advances in their counter-attacks. I mean, that is a good deal of land they've taken back. So they have done, I think, a fairly decent job of retaking some of that land. The question is, how many troops and equipment, pieces of equipment are they losing? And how many are they having to throw into that counterattack? And has that affected activities across the rest of the front line? Well, it's interesting that there are no gains to the rest of the front line until we get down to the Pokrovsk direction. No changes to northeast axis from Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea. No advances for either side in the Serebryansky Forest or the Tversk front line. Chasiv Yar, no movement. And then we get down to New York and Toretsk, and no movement there either, which is significant for 2 days worth of activity. And Pokrovsk, there is movement, and quite a bit has been going on there. Before we get there, let's just run through some of the front line that I've just whisked over. So Russia ramps up pressure near Kupiansk. Ukraine repels cross-border attacking Kharkiv as well. So there is supposedly a ramping up of activity in Kupiansk. That's probably a reflection of the activity that took place in Sinkivka, that small town just north of Kupiansk that we've seen the Russians get some success in. And then No Reports talks about the Pischani area where Russian forces managed to advance there after forcing a breakthrough some weeks ago. They're now uncomfortably close to the Oskil River. So this would suggest that they've made further gains, although it's not reflected on my mapping at the moment because I think it's already pretty much there. That's what Surat Maps has probably got indicated. There's that water feature that you can see in Null Reports is mapped there. And so moving on to 1, 2, 3, just here. So this will be the 1, 2, 3. So just there. That is already reflected in the mapping. He would have that as grey zone. That's the area he has as grey zone. Andrew Perpetua has some of that under Russian control. Surat Maps has all of that under Russian control. But anyway, that's maybe a little catching up to what we'd previously caught with the other two mappers. So now to go back to Bakhmut, I've got one source for there, so Chasiv Yar area. Again, no report says Russians have established a foothold on the western side of the Donbass Canal after occupying Kalinivka. Ukrainian sources report heavy fighting. It's unclear if Russia managed to advance further to the west. So although he says a foothold, he's mapped that as a grey zone, and that is just across the canal here at Kalinivka. Andrew Perpetua doesn't have that. Surat Maps has for some time had these two areas under Russian control, but it's unlikely. It's probably more likely it is indeed grey zone. Right, and then finally we get down to where I kind of was anyway, which is the Pokrovsk area. So we can see, as according to Surat Maps, some slight gains for the Russians in the settlement sort of on the way to it's Hrodivka there, on the way to Pokrovsk, very close to Pokrovsk, Miranrad first and then Pokrovsk. So slightly worrying for the Ukrainians there, but as we've seen in the last week or two, all of the previous recent advances have been towards the southwest here and moving in that direction. Seladove and some of these other places. Andrew Perpetua has some fairly substantial gains for the Russians all the way along the front line, really. Surat Maps has some small gains up here just by Novohrodivka there, just to the west of there. And then Surat Maps likewise has some fairly substantial gains around Ukrainsk and that mining heap there. So yeah, it's looking a little bit challenging around Pokrovsk again. War Monitor reports that Ukrainian forces have redeployed 2 more additional brigades to that direction, and that could be because they are under the cosh there. You've got Karadag that was brought in to do, and they've done a pretty good job by the looks of it. There's lots of footage of them attriting Russian forces, but it's still going to be super tough for the Ukrainians. Now, Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, says geolocated footage published on the 10th of September indicates that Russian forces recently marginally advanced along a windbreak south of Makivka, that's northwest of Crimea. That's going further back north. We're looking at the whole eastern front line with them here. Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces also advanced west and south of Sinkivka, which we've already mapped previously. I talked about that, but no confirmation of these claims. And then as we go on further, geolocated footage published on September the 10th indicates that Russian forces recently marginally advanced in the fields northwest of Bilohorivka. That is interesting. So that's, sorry, I'm going all over the shop here. That's just south of the forest up here. So they're saying northwest of Bilohorivka, in this kind of area, the Russians might well have advanced, which is what Surat Maps has previously said. A bit of difference between those two sources. And then as we come further to the south, Chaziv Yar, offensive operations continue, no changes. Russian forces marginally advanced in eastern Toretsk amid continued fighting there on the 10th. Geolocated footage published on the 5th indicates that Russian forces marginally advanced in Toretsk. Well, that's 6 days away now. And yes, so claims of advances over the last, I guess, a week in Toretsk, but I don't think anything particularly in the last few days. And then they say Russian forces recently marginally advanced southeast of Pokrovsk and west of Donetsk city amid continued offensive operations in the area. There's geolocated footage to suggest various advances there, including 1.5 kilometers west of Novohradivka, which is what we were just talking about. If I flip all the way back here, and you've got this area of Novohradivka, and that's the area they're likely talking about, 1.5 kilometers. Let's see what that is. And there you go, 1.5 kilometers. So that's possibly what the ISW are talking about there. Russian mill bloggers claimed that, and there's some advances northeast of Seledove, which is this area down here. So northeast of Seledove would be over here. Sorry, get my compass right. So some advances there, and we've seen that both mappers have shown advances either in the last 24 hours or previously. So Surat Maps here has this under Russian control. Andrew Perpetua not so much. So lots of advances around here. It is slightly worrying given that, the Russians are now counterattacking in Kursk. Now, there was a really interesting in-depth anecdote from a Russian source in this area saying that we are really struggling in the Pokrovsk direction as a result of attrition, and we are just continually throwing equipment and personnel at the Ukrainians. Ukrainians do have reserves, and we are getting super attrited to the point where we're sending in drone operators as infantry on these assaults. So although the gains are grinding on and they are fairly substantial over time, the question is always, at what cost does this come to the Russians, and how will it leave them over the autumn and winter? And this claim indicated that it was actually not looking good for them, and it's just relentless. But the Russians don't seem to be concerned with that, with the impact on personnel, on life and equipment. They are looking primarily at territorial gain, despite the cost. Now, you've got this massive pocket of Ukrainian land here and no doubt forces and fortifications. That is still a worry, as the Russians are making further gains to the west of Krasnohorivka along these reservoirs and the river here in this part of Krasnohorivka. So that is a worry. Both mappers showing the Russians having more success there, and that makes it the more problematic for the Ukrainians, sort of south of Zelena Persia and into this whole area of farmland there, so south of Karlivka. definitely one to look out for. I don't know whether the Ukrainians are pulling out there. It doesn't look like it would be a fun place to hang out, that's for sure. And when we go further to the south, we come past Mariinka, no change there. Novomykhailivka, no change there. And then a little bit of map changing in favor of the Ukrainians, as according to Andrew Perpetuan. It's probably a rejig as opposed to a counterattack by the Ukrainians, and it's to accept that actually the Russians hadn't taken full control of Vodyane as he had initially claimed, and that might have been overzealous, and it's likely more of a grey zone. And actually, Surat Maps has that even. Oh no, I've not done the mapping correctly there. I might need to go and change that. So let's see if I can change that. That was a little bit silly of me. So it's really irritating when it doesn't save changes to have to make entire mapping changes again, and that's what just happened. So, okay, right. Andrew Perpetua has redrawn the map so that this whole area is no longer under Russian control, probably a grey zone. Surat Maps has that now all under Russian control, and that they control the whole of Vodyane, this side of the T0. Is it 652 here or 5? Goodness me, 532. My eyesight's not what it used to be. Yeah, so you have some major gains for the Russians around this highway and over the highway, completely interdicted, taking control of at least large parts of Vodyane. And as according to Surat Maps, the whole of this mine here, coal mine number 1. You another one just behind that, another area just behind that they could be setting their eyes on next, or it could be that that's still a grey zone, and Andrew Perpetua is correct there. And just south of there, some of the fields now under Russian control again, according to Surat Map. So some differences between the mappers around here, but fierce fighting taking place here, and you would have to think that Vuhledar is on the verge of not being under control of the Ukrainians there, because it's really, this is no report saying this whole area is grey zone or captured by the Russians, and that's really testing the defensive capabilities of Vuhledar as they become to look rather flanked there. Now, no report says the Ukrainian sources contradict each other whether Vodyane is occupied, and that's possibly why you've seen the change from Andrew Perpetua back the other way. For now, we keep it under Ukrainian control. Russians have advanced and occupied a part of Pivdeno-Donbaska coal mine, map adjusted with incremental changes over the past week. So that's at least part of that mine there. So no reports indicating that there is a bit of confusion as to exactly who does control Vodyane. But you can rest assured that the Russians will be absolutely going hammer and tongs there, because it's kind of key to the control of the larger area to the west of that highway. Okay, that's what's been going on all along the front line. Hopefully that was of some use to you. Thank you very much for watching. It is definitely a case of looking to see whether the Russians are going to be successful with continuing to push back all of that land that the Ukrainians have taken. They have retaken some fairly considerable land over the last 2 days, the Russians. So it does seem a shame, but then that was kind of what the goal of the Ukrainians was. One of the main goals was to get those 60,000 troops up there, which has happened. They would want to keep hold of large areas of this land, though, because it does act as a really important bargaining chip were they pressed into negotiations. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, guys. Speak soon. Toodle pits.